Alrighty tighty folks, today we're going to try a couple of new things out and see how well they go. This is part one of the forklift, which I've been just incredibly excited about. I've been wanting to get into this and cut the videos and show you guys because this thing has been just entertaining as all get out. At the end of the day, it's all the same stuff, really. We start off this video with the number plate. You guys can see there. You can take a pause and look it over if you're really that interested. I also put the serial number or the model number down there at the bottom of the screen. And in this video, we'll be checking out the brakes. So when I got down here, the owner, which is the same guy that owns the 4Runner that we saw previously, he said that it hasn't worked in a few weeks, so it recently failed. And when you hit the brakes, nothing happened. So we drove it into the shop, and sure enough, the brake pedal does nothing. So first thing I wanted to do was pull at least one of the drums apart just to make sure the stuff inside the drum was still intact. So I figured I'd go with the left side. Ignore me still having the parking brake on. Trying to turn the drum there. It's fine. I slow this bit down, well, normal speed, so you can see a little technique. You don't need an impact screwdriver to break screws loose. You can use a little bit of finessing with a pair of hammers. You don't want to smack the screw directly with the hammer, and you don't want to hit it too hard, because what you'll end up doing is screwing up the head of the screw where your tool's supposed to go. We'll see. I had to do that to one of the other screws on the other side. Here in a little bit we'll see that guy. But for this one, just little hammer, big hammer, tap it a couple of times. There we go with the parking brake on still. And you can see we pull. It's just like any other drum on a spindle. It's got the bearing and it's got the spindle nut, and once you pull those out, the drum just comes right off, assuming that the brake shoes are still intact and nothing is interfering with the machinery. This bit I wanted to show you guys. I didn't get a chance to film it on the other side, but I figured I'd show you guys a little technique. I like to do these where I show you guys kind of techniques to use your body to your advantage, even if you're not big and strong. I mean, obviously I'm fairly large myself, and I do have a little bit of muscle. I can do a lot of this stuff without these techniques, but I wasn't always this way. A lot of these I developed when I was younger and had to figure out ways of doing these things without the muscle. I developed the muscle later, probably by working on all these things. But you watch, I put my back straight and my hand on my knee. That was the key. These lug nuts were actually really quite tight, and you can see my face all scrunching up there. They were quite tight even for me. And the first bit you saw, I did not have my hand on my knee and they wouldn't budge. I put my hand on my knee and I used not only the strength of my legs, but also the strength of my arm, in addition to the legs, to be able to break the lug nuts loose off the wheel. And easy peasy, job's a good. Ignore the fact that the forklift is kind of tipply-topply, and I promise you it was not this scary in normal speed. Doing this stuff live myself in person, I promise you it wasn't as scary as it looks. I sped the video up and I was like, oh, that doesn't look safe at all. Good thing OSHA's not here. Once we get the other wheel off, we can pull the right side drum and inspect it. You can see there, that was the one that I'd slightly damaged. I caved in the metal on the head of the screw, and it still didn't want to come loose, so that thing had some torque on it. I ended up having to use a crescent on the screwdriver there to get him broken loose. I ended up replacing them anyway. Our local Ace had exactly those screws. They're 6x1 what are those, machine screws? They have the conical head, and therefore, you know, tractors and trucks and what have you. So, pretty common piece of hardware. The local Ace Hardware had a pair of them, so we just replaced them anyway. The other one wasn't even bad. It wasn't even damaged whenever I pulled it out. You also have to pull these axle stubs out whenever you're pulling the drums off, just because they sit on the outside. You use the wheel studs to turn the wheels via the motion of the axle, which is driven by the differential, which is driven out of the transmission, etc., etc. Kind of a... I haven't seen one of these before. I'm sure it's a common thing used across a number of different pieces of machinery, but mostly having done cars and lawnmowers, I've not seen a mechanism like that. So we got the axles out and we got them all cleaned up. Somebody put what looked to be black RTV all over these surfaces, and I had genuinely no clue why you would do that. The differential, you do not fill up the differential to oil flowing into the axle tubes. You also do not drive forklifts on steep inclines that the oil could slosh out of the differential. You might get a little tiny bit slung into the tube, but there's a wheel seal, so it's not really all that... There's really not a point of putting a sealant around the whole thing. I don't know, it makes no sense to me. It was kind of silly. So I cleaned all that off. You'll see here in a minute, we'll also clean that same surface of the brake drum where all those wheel studs are sitting. Again, I will reiterate probably 1,000 times over the course of these, do not stick your hands in this chemical mixture that I've got. The B12 chem tool and the carb cleaner bucket there. It's really, really, really not good for your hands. It's really quite bad. I would recommend finding some big heavy duty like chemical resistant gloves. Save your hands. Don't be like me. You'll see there we got to knock out the wheel seal and the rear bearing. I just used a 1/2 inch extension and some light tippity taps from the hammeroo there, and he came right out. Funnily enough, the seals look like they were brand new. They were in amazing shape. The bearings don't look that old. The grease really didn't look that old either, so I think somebody's been in here. Well, I know for a fact somebody's been in here before me. It's like a 1985. There's no way people have not been in here before me outside of the factory. But the reason I say I think someone's been in here before me is A, the wheel seals looked really, really good. They were still rubber. They looked brand new. There was not a whole lot of dirt on them even. And something, again, we'll see it here in a minute, one of the brake springs on the right side is bent, like someone stuck a freaking screwdriver in it to get the dang spring out the... Don't use a screwdriver to get a spring off of brakes. Just don't do it. You can see here, I'll mention that again here in a minute probably. Take a screwdriver. The brake drum is harder than the screwdriver metal, so I use the head of a screwdriver to scrape all the RTV off between the studs there, because the wire wheels we have, the studs were too long. You couldn't reasonably fit a wire wheel in there. But we clean off the bearings, and we clean off the retainers, the locking retainers, and we clean off the spindle nuts. And immediately afterwards, we do our favoritist thing in the world, apparently, since I've done it like 12 times since I've been down here. And I bet you guys can guess what my favoritist thing is to do, considering you know, it's on the screen. That's also sarcasm, by the way. It's not my favorite thing to do. It's not hard. It's not tedious. It's not boring. I don't dislike it, but it's not my favoriteest thing. My favoriteest thing actually is tuning. Tuning, not carbs, but fuel injection. I like tuning fuel injection. After we get the bearings clean, of course, obviously, the thing that I'm talking about that we're going to be seeing right now is packing the bearings, right? And I don't know why I've got this thing, but I've just got to show you guys. Every time I'm doing one of these, I gotta show you guys, we're gonna pack the bearings, huzzah! And of course, me sitting there like a blackjack dealer at a casino. Gotta show you my hands. Oh, there's no tricks up my sleeve, see? And you'll see me wiping little chunkies there on the rag. That's because I don't have a parts cleaner bath with a pump and scrubbies and all the doodads, so you can't really get all of the old grease out of the bearings. So what I ended up doing was I'd pack a bit and I'd wipe the contaminated grease off the top of the bearing as it started to come out and wipe it off to the side. I wanted to make sure all of the grease inside this system was brand new, no contaminations as far as we can help it. Obviously, we live on Earth in the Milky Way, in this universe that we live in, so there's no getting away from dirt. Dirt is everywhere. Everything is dirt. But I want to do the kind of the best job I possibly could. So we got as much of the dirty grease out of the bearings as possible. These guys were a lot easier to hold compared with the 4Runner bearings because they were a little bit bigger, which means my fingers fit in them slightly more easily. After I got all that done, I would needed to figure out quite exactly what was happening with the brakes. I already did the cursory inspection, showed me that the brakes weren't moving when you hit the pedal. So it was a fluid problem, an adjustment problem, brake master, brake booster, something like that, right? So I had to just start pulling the stuff apart and figure out exactly where the failure laid. Where the failure was. First thing I did was I just, right through the inspection plate, figured I'd try to see if I could see exactly what was going on. Maybe a linkage fell off or something. That would be the simple solution, but that was not the case. So you see here, I've got to disassemble the whole top end of the body of the forklift. Got to pull the seat off and got to pull the plate out and figure out exactly where the failure is among these. How many parts are there? Let's see. Brake booster, brake master, wheel cylinder, linkage, pedal. So six different major areas where something could fail. Generally, failures of this nature are pretty obvious. This is one of those ones that was slightly less obvious. I believe what had happened is because the owner told me he tried to bleed the system before I got down here, and what I believe happened is he introduced some air into the lines, and that compounded an issue that we'll see here in a second. By the time I got down here, the bleeder screws were all screwed up, so we had to replace the wheel cylinder, so you'll see that we're doing that here in a minute. Ignore this section where I'm adjusting the shifter because it was just really annoying to me. So I adjusted the shifter while I had the thing open anyway, and I was looking in the area. I figured I'd start it up and get the engine running and press the brakes just to see if the brake booster made any change to the motion of the brake system. It did not. I ended up off camera pulling, once the brake booster and the brake master were separated, I ended up applying vacuum and pushing on the rod, and the brake booster worked just fine. It didn't leak. what ended up, I guess what ended up being the problem was, so the right side brake adjuster had gotten stuck. And then, in an effort to try to bleed the system, thinking somehow there's air in the lines, which brakes are closed systems. If you do not open it, there is no air in the line. Just so you guys know that. If it's a closed system. If you do not open it, you are not introducing... There's no way air can get introduced into the line outside of a mechanical failure, in which case you have bigger problems than air in the line. Continuing on. I removed the brake master and the booster, and to do that you have to remove the pedal assembly. Look forward to the next video on the pedal assembly. Because it was... yeah, it was a bit worn and not great. So I rebuilt it in what I believe will be actually the next video. I'm not done editing yet, so stand by. But to remove the booster and the master, because it's not a firewall, the front bulkhead, I guess you'd call it. The master sits about half an inch from the front bulkhead, but the booster has a rod that goes into the master that presses the master. It's not just it's not a facing, it's a rod, and it's greater than the distance from the master to the bulkhead that the rod is inside the facing of the brake master. So you actually have to pull the pedal assembly along with the booster master assembly off of its mounting on the top of the transmission housing to be able to get the whole thing apart in the first place. So this is another one of those examples of I'm down here and everything I touch is either not been maintained, damaged, broken, maintained poorly, or someone else has been in there and done something incorrectly or incompletely. One of those 16 things I said right there. In the case of this, it was lack of maintenance. So I got in there and everything I touched, something broke or something was already broken and it needed to be fixed to make the thing work correctly. You can see now that we're back down looking at the brakes themselves, the adjuster on the right side wasn't even doing anything. It was just kind of, you saw it, it was kind of wobbly and floppily. So that's less than ideal, obviously. I did try, this is the bit where I did try to bleed the brakes initially. Pull the booster off to check it, and then I was going to bleed the brakes by hand. But the brake bleeders were, like I said, the brake bleeders were all screwed up. I could get a wrench on it, but the shoulders and the bleeder were so rounded that even a flare nut wrench wouldn't grab it enough to open the bleeder. So the only option I had was to disassemble the whole thing and replace the wheel cylinders. After I discovered that, I tried pulling just the wheel cylinder, leaving the brake shoes in place and all the springs in place, which sometimes you can do, sometimes you can't do. This is one of those cannot situations. Item number one is you can get one bolt out of the wheel cylinder with the backing plate installed on the forklift. The other bolt, you cannot. You can't get a wrench on it, you can't get a socket on it, you can't get anything on it. It's just the arm that holds the brakes in place, which is also the lower arm for the fork lift assembly, the fork rack assembly, lower mounting points. It's not cut out for the bolt. So to get it apart, you have to take the whole thing off of the forklift. You saw there, I was taking pictures. It's a very handy thing that I've noticed a lot of younger, newer technicians do not do. They don't take pictures of whatever it is they're working on so that they can later reference them and figure out how the stuff goes back together in the case that you forget. It happens sometimes. Sometimes you have to go away from a project for a week and you come back and it's not right. You'll see there, I could not turn the adjuster. What I ended up having to do was I had to take 2 channel locks and grab the adjuster and twist it with 2 channel locks all the way out. It was so tight. Once I got it out, it was fine. You saw right there that bent spring. We'll see him again in just a moment. But the adjuster for the right side was all the way in and stuck, frozen. Funnily enough, there's no rust inside of it. We ended up getting brand new adjusters and 98%. So I went online and I tried to find the brake hardware, and everywhere was out of it. It was either, I don't know, discontinued or out of stock or back ordered, or I don't remember exactly what it is at this point, but I couldn't get my hands on the brake hardware readily. So what I ended up doing is I was looking at this system. I was like, well, it's just drum brakes. It looks like drum brakes. So I went down to Napa, we got in the book, and we started pulling up stuff that measured right. It ended up being 5 different kits to be able to get the brakes back together on this thing correctly. We'll see those again here in a second. I get ahead of myself. I get excited. The forklift was very, very fun for me. Once we got the backing plates off, obviously we're in there anyway. We might as well clean them up a little bit. If I had a blast cabinet, I would have preferred to blast them to clean them. And you can see there, that was one of the retainer pins for the brake shoes. That guy was about 50% chewed through, which means while somebody had been in there before me, it does not appear as though they had replaced any of the hardware. So the hardware is very, very likely either from the factory, the original brake hardware, or very nearly from 1985. The wheel cylinder was also kind of a pain in the butt to remove. You saw I had to pound it out. And then after that we go to, cleaning the backing plate there. Because we don't want to start. I didn't replace the shoes because the shoes still have 50% life left in them. No point in replacing it if it doesn't need it. It's not a car, so it's not going to... The shoes don't wear all that fast. The springs actually seem to have worn out faster than the brake shoes. It's entirely possible somebody replaced the shoes before me. That's entirely possible. But the shoes and the drums both measured more than sufficient to be safe to put it back together. There's that bent spring again. You can see it's not straight. It's supposed to be straight, and it's not straight. It's bent off to one side. And while perhaps that's not the worst thing in the world, it should still not be that way. If you're going to take this thing apart and put it back together, if you bend the spring, replace the spring. The spring costs I swear each one of the brake kits that I got was $7. $7 for a whole kit of parts. Not just the one spring. A whole kit, like 7, 8 springs. And clips and pins and little rubbery bits and all kinds of $7 or $8. If you bend the spring, replace the dang spring. Anyway. Once we get everything all cleaned back up, I got the new wheel cylinder in there after we got all the parts shipped in. I was able to find a site that had a bunch of the parts, just for whatever reason, not the brake hardware. There was also a couple of things that I could not find, like the wheel seal I couldn't find. Luckily, the wheel seals were in pretty good shape, so we didn't have to replace them. But I looked them up before we found out they were in good shape, so if they'd been in bad shape, we kind of would have been halfway SOL. And you can see that's the reason I don't like split lock washers. That right there, that little burr on that nut. And I slowed this bit down. Well, I left it at 100% speed for you guys. So you can see literally how long it takes to get that burr off of there. In 5 or 6 seconds. I took a flathead screwdriver, bumped it on the bench and Bob's your uncle. Got rid of that little burr. But that's kind of the reason I don't like split lock washers, is because they damage the nut. Granted, these are fairly substantial nuts, so it's not like one little burr is going to completely ruin something. Another thing of note is that I had no torque specs for any of this. So what I did is I went and I untorqued the other side and subtracted 5%, and that came out to around 95, 100. It was, the nuts on the other side weren't all the same torque to break them loose, so I kind of averaged them, and it came out to about 95, 100 foot-pounds of torque, which, torquing them down and the size of the nut and the bolts, felt about right for the material, the time period, the size of the nuts and studs, etc., etc. There's our 3 brake kits to get the correct springs for the 4 different springs that we needed. And you can see the springs aren't exactly the same, but they don't necessarily need to be either for this application. If this were a car on a road, driven around in public with other people, I would say absolutely 100% you do not deviate from the factory hardware unless you are upgrading it and putting, more safe hardware on it. But for this case, the worst you're going to do is bump into a fence and dent a fence pole. You're not really going to hurt anybody. Anytime we operate the forklift in this yard, we make sure we all keep clear. Everybody that comes in the yard when the forklift is in operation knows how to be safe around the forklift. So it's not as critical in this application, I would say. And the purpose of the springs is just to hold the shoes in place and keep them from just falling off when you're not applying the brakes. That's really all they're there for. You can see I had to pull the backing plate back off again because I did not realize there was no cutout on the bracket for the shoe retainer pin. So I had to pull the backing plate off to put the pin back in the plate from the back side there. Not a big deal. 6 bolts, 100 foot-pounds of torque, super easy. And of course, because there was no room behind the backing plate for the pin, thank you Nissan, putting the spring and the retainer clip on was kind of a pain in the butt, as you can see right here. Try number 2. Number 2. It still didn't work. Okay. Can we get a tool back there? No, we can't get it. Okay, sure. They had these little rubber boot things on the pins that I couldn't find replacements for. Probably could have made something out of a little piece of hose or something, but they're supposed to keep the pins in place while you put the retainer on. But because they're older and kind of looser, they did not hold the pins tightly enough, and I just kind of had to fight with it a little bit. And I will say that I accidentally got the wrong adjuster kit for the right side initially. I got 2 right sides. I thought I got a right and a left, but I actually got 2 rights. So I ended up having to take that kit back and get a right and a left side kit, so that it would the adjuster would actually adjust when the self-adjuster cable pulled up on the little mechanism to adjust the brakes. So the brakes should now adjust themselves correctly as they wear, which is a good thing. But we get all the springs and the little clippies and everything all put back together, and I used a combination of the pictures on my phone and the other side. You can see me checking it there periodically to verify that I was putting them back together correctly. And I'm sure plenty of people in the comments will let me know that there is a tool for brake springs. I've never been able to figure out how to use it successfully, so I just use pliers. It's fine. As always, don't forget to like it, subscribe it, crank it, and rip it. And leave a comment down below letting me know how much of this you didn't really care about, or you liked or didn't like, or whatever. And we'll see you in the next one.